I don't know how many of you watched that Service of the Living Tradition last weekend, which is for the big GA. Oh, lots of you. Okay, so they always sing this song called For All the Saints, who from their labors rest. And that hymn is always meant to me. It's about the people in the congregation. They sing it for the ministers, but I think of it as, I mean, this congregation has been full of saints, and that's basically what I'm talking about today. We headline things by the ministers. We had Cornerizian from 1979 to 1996, and then we had Kendall Gibbons. We had an interim minister, our first interim minister, Bob Kaufman, in between Corin and Kendall Gibbons. And then we had Kendall from 1998 to 2012, and a quick interim with Pam Allen Thompson. And then we had David Breeden, and we've had David Breeden up until 2024. And now we have Rev Yulin, who is making history with us. Actually, literally, look at this. She does all the work. God. Something that gets a little less attention is the people that supported the ministers, the staff that we've had that. It's still recording on Zoom, even though I'm not seeing it up there. Okay. There have been a number of people, assistant ministers through the years, who have been really phenomenal. And we've had, along with this, we've had this problem. At times we had an adult membership of 800, and we had like children's registration of 300. It's pretty phenomenal. We would not have gotten by without people like Carol Isaac, who was our first. She's now, you know her as Carol Isaac. In those days, you know her as Carol Barclay now. Okay, in those days she had a different name. She was our first membership director, and she came in with Corin and helped quite a bit. And people like Carol Kepp, who was our first social action director, and she did a lot for us. In fact, what I'll be telling you about social action today is from a summary she put together. We were also very lucky from 2015 to 2023 and also 2024 to have Jim Foti as an assistant minister and Kelly Clement as an assistant minister, because we're a big group. Right now we have fabulous people in the office like Tim Rowell and Doug Rohde and Bethany. I mean, we've been very, very lucky. But if you can ever get your hands on the board minutes, the people who've served on our boards have just been extraordinary. George Hutchinson has been president of the board how many years? I don't know how many terms. And pardon? Just one? Are you sure? Oh my God, your name is all over things. You were on the board a lot. Yeah, right. Let's see, Mr. Sperber. He was on the board for quite a while. John Bulow was the treasurer of this congregation for like a decade. And finally, Gordon Asselstein took over from him and was our treasurer for quite a while. This is this problem. Yes, Ruth.
The name
John Bulow.
Got money to buy cars and buy.
Oh, the Humanist Credit Union, and that would be Kathleen's dad was one of the people on that. Yeah, and there were some other people. We did, when we talked about how we forged our way through the Depression years, but that was pretty important. And they also, when we needed to do things for the building, the credit union loaned us money. This needs to be repeated aloud. It set Ruth's Catholic friends back on their ears when she told them that in the Canary Islands, when she told them that the Humanist Credit Union had given you and your husband money to buy a Renault. Yes, okay. Yeah, why not? I'm sure it is. My goodness. One of the big things that we have done in this congregation is healthcare and education. But we learned as we moved into the years under Cornerizian and Kendall Gibbons to work in solidarity with other organizations around town. So we were able to do many more heavy lifting things. We and then we did in the 1980s a lot of. Have you ever heard of Shirley Losey? Oh my God, that woman did so much and was so modest. She ran Wesley Hot Meals with a consortium of churches for years. I think you know Lee McKay, who was the spouse of Cornerizian. She did Person to Person, which was integrating Somali families into Minneapolis. You did see a photograph this morning of Mibs Pearson doing paintings. She was painting houses. We did a lot of Habitat for Humanity work with other UU congregations and with other congregations that were not Unitarian. We worked in the Wilder Child Guidance Clinic, helping kids become better adapted to school. We worked on the Jeremiah Project. We worked at Sabbathani. We worked at cleaning up. Some of you probably actually worked over cleaning up at the Agape Child Development Center in North Minneapolis. I'll bet you did. There were some, right now, I think, jump in on if you have an idea. Right now we're doing the MCTC sandwiches. Marcy Lessler is heading that up. And I believe we're doing that with other congregations. And it's snack bags. Okay, snack bags. And we're doing, Dave Lessler is leading us in doing, second Sunday meal. And you can think of other things. We also, after World War II, we supported a refugee family here, which is kind of amazing, through the UUSC. In 1980s, we supported a Laotian family for several years. In 1992, Tibetans who had fled from Tibet after its Chinese invasion and were in refugee camps in Nepal arranged a way to come to the United States. And someone said, hey, go to Minnesota. It's a great place. There was an appeal that went out to congregations in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Will you help integrate these Tibetans? And we volunteered to take all of them. And that was 20% of the Tibetans who came to the United States. The Dalai Lama, you did see a picture this morning of the Dalai Lama greeting Kendall. Yeah, Anita.
Ceremonies, celebrations here.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sure Donald Trump is not trying to deport them.
Well, that's it. That's another. Now, see, there's another thing we're going to get involved in. You just know it. In 1982, we started designating second Sundays of the month as donation Sundays. And we have, there are any number of things that kind of border on the political. White Earth Land Recovery Project fundraising that we've done, AIDS walks. Let's see. Housing. Do you guys know that we contributed to housing in Heritage Park? If you go on Olson Highway into the city, we had a capital campaign and we contributed $25,000 to that whole project. You'll hear more about Unity Summer from Adele, which was a program getting our adolescents out doing good things. We started doing service auctions in 1982. Margaret McCoy and Roger Upham led that project. And we've done, all along doing this, we've been ongoing educating ourselves about issues out in the world. We have taught ourselves about environment, done a lot of programs on environment. There was a project to get us all hooked up to solar farms, and that was Marcy Lessler and several other UU congregations. Now we have a wonderful environmental justice group, and we have people doing postcards every Sunday, which is, this is a way to keep all of us up to date on what's going on in Minnesota. How many, is it like 2,000? No, it's more than 2,000, more than 2,000 cards and letters that members of this congregation wrote before the election, and they Get Out the Vote project. We were all meeting down in the library. It was a lot of fun. And I believe that was headed by Miss Anita Martinez. Okay, you did. Ha ha. Over 7,000. Okay, wow, guys. It is pretty phenomenal. We have, that started in 2004. Yep. No. Right after, okay. Right, we remember that one. How do you support an organization like this? Because we tend to attract, we attract more people than are rich. And in the beginning years of this congregation, you remember like Mr. Gale and those were, they owned the riverfront. They owned the mills down there, the Washburns, they were all in this congregation. We have had to think about, and sometimes the board has considered, should we make it a requirement that you have given at least $120 each year in order to be a voting member? That's something we have weighed. I don't know how you feel about it, but it's something to think about. In 1958, because there were all these ups and downs financially, and you never know when your boiler's going to go out, which ours did, lovely Leela Lang, some of you remember her, she sent a check for $5 to the FUS endowment and mailed it to the board. And they didn't know what to do with it. And she wasn't getting her check back from the bank. And so she raised a fuss. And she and Fred raised a fuss for quite a while and finally got the endowment started. The endowment was started in 1969. It was a long time, from 1958 to 1969. And that endowment the idea is if we have that money there, it'll cushion us through hard times and surprises. It became incorporated as the foundation only in 1992. And in the 90s, through the 90s and into the year 2000, there have been more and more gifts to this foundation, which gives us a little hunk of money every year. We lost, you all know we lost the school in this building. We were renting to a school. And they decided not to continue as a school. And so here we are, a source of income is gone. That's the kind of things our endowment will help us with. But it also, many of these endowment funds are designated for arts and learning. That's the Hendrickson Fund. The Emerson Hop Fund is for education, religious education, and those are consolidated into our RE. The Sigmund family gave us a wad of money so that we could commission music. Kurt Pearson, the Kurt Pearson Fund, which came to us in 1992, is always designated as gifts to organizations in the community who are doing good work. We learn about them and then we give them a grant. And it's good for all of us. Gordon Asselstein in 1994 had a great idea, and he wanted a fund that could be used right away. So the Future Is Now Fund in the foundation. We've been very, very lucky. It has been, it has gotten us through some major things. We've had to work, okay, we're sitting in air conditioning. Do you realize that we never had air conditioning until a few years ago? I mean, it's just phenomenal. There are so many things that are new about this building. Elevators, enlarged restrooms, a new oil tank in 1994. You don't see it, but it's very important. And a kitchen that we can really use. All right, we're oil tank free. Removed. Are we going to get nuclear power or are we still in nuclear free zone? Oh, solar panels. Yeah, let's go with solar panels. We have been exceedingly fortunate in the musicians that we have had at this institution. I think because the first people who formed the society in 1881, many of them were music faculty at the university, and they loved music, and they would. We had Heinrich Fleischer on our organ for years and years and years. And when he left, we needed somebody to play the organ. So we brought in Barbara Brooks. We had a series of wonderful, wonderful music directors. You will know the name Thomas Nee, who went on to write and conduct in California. You'll know Charles Sigmund, who was our music director at many times. Charles Sigmund convinced 50 of us to join the chorus. We had a chorus of 50 voices. I just want you to know that. Carrie John Franklin. Barb Brooks was with us until 2021. And now we have Mike Vassage, and I think you'll agree with me. Mike Vassage is pretty fantastic. Yes. So if the people at First Universalist want to accuse us of worshiping music, let them. I would like to turn this over to George for a moment of humor. He goes, because we have limited time, and I want you to hear from Adele ultimately about religious education, which I think is really a large hunk of our mission in the world. George.
So I'm apparently tasked with talking to you about some people and things that are interstitial to this other larger narrative. And even using the word interstitial still apparently does not absolve me from the fact that I am apparently not a serious person. Anyway, the first interstitial thing I'll talk to you about is Bob Kaufman, who was an interim minister. Now, I really don't know much about Bob Kaufman. And we have one picture. Was it? Yeah, yes, interim. Sorry. He was between Corin and Kendall. And that's when Lisa and I first came here. And so it was interesting. We were looking for a place without dogma, and we apparently found it. I asked Bob, do Unitarians, so I was all confused. I didn't know what was going on here, and I'd come from the Catholic Church, and I'm a recovering Catholic. My name is George. So I asked Bob, do Unitarians believe in one God or three gods or no gods? And he said, I'm not going to answer that question, which I thought was kind of rude. And so, but now it makes absolute perfect sense. So, okay, I get it. And again, I don't have a tremendous amount of factual information on Bob. And seeing as how he was actually a pretty big guy in the UU world, there isn't much on the websites except for, remembrances. And anyway, so I'm just going to tell you things he said to me. I don't know if they're true or not. He claimed to have coined the phrase, kissing someone who smokes is like licking an ashtray. I don't know how true that is, but he apparently was actually a comedy writer on television, and he also turns out to be right about the ashtray. He also told me that he was active in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, and that Martin Luther King had talked to him and wondered if maybe he should do his civil rights work as a Unitarian minister. And who's to say whether that would have been a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. I mean, that's kind of an interesting point in history where anything could have happened. He seemed to have had friends in high places. And one guest, I bet you Ray remembers this, but one guest was from an aerospace company. I think it was Scaled Composites. I'm not sure. Some of the early people who were doing round the world flights without refueling kind of things. And he brought a guy here who sent a little ornithopter made out of this miraculous plastic material that was so light, the wings, you could see through it. And he said, I'm going to let this loose. And it flew around in here. I don't know. Do you remember this, Ray? Maybe not. You remember that? And it flew around here, and he said, when it lands, don't touch it, because it was so fragile, you would absolutely break it. So that was kind of wild. And he had other interesting people he'd bring by, and I don't really know who all of those were. Kaufman was also a minister in a number of congregations in the U.S., as well as being an interim minister in Australia and many U.S. states, including California, which was evident in his choice of attire that often included a black turtleneck with some kind of big gold thing, like he just throw back to the 60s. And he seemed to delight in that. He was to be controversial and push, and really interesting guy. So we decided to stay because we're kind of weird people too. I speak for myself. Sorry, dear. His bio includes notes that he had a PhD in psychology and worked in a variety of professions: business, finance, journalism, television, public relations, and construction, because why not? He wrote for the Alan Young Show and recorded a comedy album for Decca Records entitled A Trip Through a Blown Mind. His poetry has appeared in several anthologies, and recently, before his death, published I Love You, I Think, or I Would If I Knew What It Meant. 27 chapters of wit and wisdom on life, laughter, and love. And when he left the FUS, he went to the Ethical Culture Center in New York City. That's Bob Kaufman. Now let's turn to Swami Vivekananda. Oh, sorry. We won't. Really?
On
Okay.
a kind of a on the spot thing, because the other interim minister was stuck in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things he said, he doesn't marry people. He only married one person. We marry each other.
Oh, there you go.
And the other thing that he did during Sunday services, he had the children come forward and sit on the steps. And because of that, Bruce and I chose to, our wedding, to have any children come forward and sit on the step.
Very cool. Yeah. We have another Bob Kaufman remembrance.
Yeah, just a couple of things about Bob Kaufman. One thing he did to, quote unquote, shake things up was he slightly changed the angle of the pews. And there were all kinds of people that, when he proposed that, oh, no, you can't do that. You can't. And then once it was done, they liked it.
That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah. The other thing about Bob is he used to do a series of predictions for the following year. Of course, his was based on, science and history. And in fact, one year he was even on NPR giving his predictions for the following year. So
that sounds like a great gift, giving predictions for the following year when you're not going to be around.
Well, these were kind of nationwide
Yeah, right.
predictions.
I was going to mention the pews, but the thing that I will say on that is I thought it was very audacious at the time for an interim minister to propose something like that. But at the same time, he was using the capital he had as an incoming interim minister. But the thing I'd like to also mention is he had a sermon, which has always stayed with me, and was live your life backwards. And it was to think about, what do you want your obituary to be? And then live now in a way that you would like to bring that story to fruition. It was a very creative and very formative sermon.
Kind of like be the person that your dog thinks you are. Or the George Carlin routine. Well, how come this doesn't work backwards? Like, we're in diapers on either end, but if we start out with all the knowledge, we'll just be better off. And then at the end, we get oblivious. And then, anyway, George Carlin.
I just want to say, I remember one thing he told us too. He was, when he was working in California, and they were doing some parade, and some religious organization set up a stand or something that said, your questions answered here. He set up right across the street from them saying, your answers questioned here.
Yes. That's right. So kind of an interesting character, and and again, that's kind of the reason we stayed, and then he went away. But still, anyway, shall we turn to Swami Vivekananda? It's not come. It's what?
Get the connection to work with the screen.
Then we'll just roll with it, and we'll just keep going.
But it'd be a very small screen.
Right. That's okay. It's just the way things are. Okay. So, Swami Vivekananda, this is a story that goes back to the beginning of FUS, but also carries on. David Breeden recounted that in 2013, a group from the local Hindu temple recently contacted me about joining the 150th birthday of Vivekananda, the Hindu priest who took the World Parliament of Religions by storm back in 1893 and introduced Vedanta Hinduism to the Western Hemisphere. Apparently he was a big guy in this stuff. David enthusiastically accepted the invitation. I was pleased that the first Unitarian Society had been thinking so far outside the box back in 1893 and wanted to continue that tradition. So the video at this point would be showing you pictures of Vivekananda, and there are some of these on the archives website, and you can go there, and there's an exhibit that has a lot of this stuff. This is the room that was packed here for the celebration, and I was here. Some of you might have been here too. Any of you at this? Apparently not. I was the only one. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing up. There we go. Barb was there. Thank you, Barb. I'm not crazy. So the room was packed for the celebration with a good number of Hindus that had driven up from Madison, Wisconsin, to attend, and so it was. Vivekananda himself spoke at the original FUS building twice in 1893. He was in the U.S. for perhaps the most famous world exhibition, the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and this is the famous one where Nikola Tesla one-upped Thomas Edison by lighting the whole thing with AC power, pretty much putting to rest Edison's idea of using DC, for all you tech heads out there. And here is I'll read from the Minneapolis Tribune from that time. Swami Vivekananda, the Brahmin priest, was greeted by a packed house last evening at the First Unitarian Church. Vivekananda is a bright, quick-witted talker, ready at all points to attack or defend, and inserts a humor into his speeches that is not lost upon his auditors. The audience embraced a large number of earnest, thinking men and women, pleased to be enlightened upon the manners and customs of India, which was his chosen subject. Robed in his native garbs, with hands for the most part clasped behind his back, Vivekananda paces back and forth the narrow platform, talking as he paces with long pauses between his sentences, as if willing that his words should sink into the deepest soil. His talk is not so weighty that the frivolous mind may not appreciate some of his sayings, but he also speaks of philosophy that carries gravest truth. He tells of the manners and customs of India, of the divided life between the male and female, the reverence for and holiness of women, and again of their degeneracy, of the calm and peaceful life that yet is not true life because it is not liberty. He speaks of the Mohammedans who form 1/5 of the Indian population, and that 65 million equal to the entire population of the United States. He speaks of the metaphysical knowledge of the plowman, who yet only knows that he pays taxes to the government. He describes the magnificence of the temples, the art of the jugglers, and he touches upon the superstitions of the people, of how they fill the water jars and stand them in the doorway before starting on a journey. He admits the reverence of the Hindu for the river Ganges and his ever-lingering wish that he shall die on its banks. He tells all these things in a quiet, half-supercilious voice that presently leads to some remark on the American way of doing things, and then his audience is in a ripple of laughter, and a tremor of clapping expresses amused acknowledgement of his sarcasm. So there we have Swami Vivekananda. So how about that? All right then.
So this was kind of alive just a couple of weeks ago. Dr. Sani, who is a member of the Hindu temple in Maple Grove, is that where it is? And some other people from there. And then the current Swami from Chicago were here, and they wanted to come here because in 2013, Dr. Sani had given a talk with David Breeden on the 150th anniversary of the 1893 World Parliament of Religions. And at that time in 2013, they had given FUS a plaque, which is hanging in the archives room, or it's in the archives room anyway. But they wanted to come see the plaque and see the building and just kind of again remember the connection between FUS and the Hindu community here. So we had a lovely chat, and they were very grateful. And now I think one of their daughters is going to use the space to get married in next summer. But anyway, so the connection continues.
A plaque might be hung in a more prominent location.
I'm not going to be that funny. Okay. I'm sorry. I've got a hard person to follow here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about RE, and that's kind of because I started here because of RE. I think a lot of people start coming here because they have kids and they want to do something with the kids. And in the years between 1986 and 2004, we were really, really fortunate to have two really thoughtful, creative, active directors of religious education, Beth Brownfield and Jan Dever. Beth served from 1986 to 1997. So she took over from Carol Wintermute. So maybe some of you know the name Wintermute. It looked like from looking at the archives that Carol's whole family had supported the program. Her husband was doing this, her daughter is doing this. So, and I think that's what happened with Beth. They made substantial changes to the programming. When Beth began, the RE schedule, which was babies to 6th grade, was a 2-hour block, and it relied on parent volunteers for support. And there was Seth Peterson, Polly Peterson's brother, was in the nursery. And I think a lot of people who had kids at that time remember Seth and holding those babies. And there were other volunteers, non-parents, often non-parents with the toddlers. And again, it was a 2-hour block beginning at 10:30 to 11. And then at 11, there was something called action hour. So the early part of the program, the first half, was focusing on art and music and movement, drama, and led by members of the congregation, but always had the parents in attendance during that time. And they learned a lot about cultural celebrations, especially with the Tibetan community. I know the kids were writing letters, pen pal letters to the Tibetans who were in the refugee camps before they came here. The topics were really varied, and Beth was quite interested in cultural studies. So there was Central American art and culture, there was African American culture, there was Buddhism, there was Christianity, and in Judaism, the kids built a model village. This is in action hour. And it was all very connected with what was going on the second hour, which is why the parents had to be there the first hour, because then they had that connection. And Beth had two really unique pieces of curriculum that she introduced. One was something called Seeing with Native Eyes. So it was very much interested in Native Americanism. And if you know Beth, even she's pursued that interest in the West Coast. And the other thing, this is at a time when the public schools weren't even mentioning this at all. So it was really, kids who had grown up in the Minnesota public schools knew very, very little about our native neighbors.
The other thing that was really unique was something that a group of people from professionals from FUS, Peter Dascoli and Becca Brackett, and a few other people organized something called Dealing with Death, because they realized that this was really a taboo topic. It wasn't talked about anywhere. And so the kids were and the kids would, my kids lost a dog, somebody else lost a cat, that kind of thing, or maybe a grandmother. So Beth was just an amazing person, and that curriculum was fantastic. During the class at the end of the unit, the younger kids, I was on the bus with the younger kids, took a trip to Lakewood Cemetery. And we would visit, this is the section with the clowns, or this is the section for the children, that kind of thing. These are young kids. Probably some of them had never been to Lakewood. And then the older kids, and this would blow me away. My kids didn't do this. I don't know if yours did. They had a visit to the funeral parlor. And that must have been another amazing thing. So Beth brought so much creativity to that curriculum. From 12 to 12:25, what were they doing? Well, they were in something called community time, and that was led by the RE staff. Now, Beth had an RE staff. There was Beth, and then there was an assistant. And so that was amazing in itself. And there were RE kids, and they were lighting the chalice, and they were talking about the principles and everything. Sure. Yes, I didn't say that, but I would like to say that. I wanted to say that. You're right. There was definitely an upstairs and a downstairs program going on, because Beth's office was downstairs and Corin's office was upstairs. And the kids weren't allowed in the service. So just having this idea that the kids could come in was and be together, because we're not a neighborhood church. So sometimes the kids that come here are coming from Brooklyn Park, Maple Grove, Inver Grove Heights, wherever, and they're coming together maybe for 2 Sundays a month, maybe for 4 Sundays a month, and they don't know anybody. And it takes a long time for the kids to even build a community, I think. So what were the junior highs doing at this time? Well, there was a focus on social service, and the youth sponsored book drives and food drives, and they shared with community organizations that they talked about. They listened to their music to identify the secret messages, whatever that meant. I remember they interviewed certain families. I don't know if you guys were in that family, but then they interviewed them, and then they took photographs of them, and then their pictures were on the wall so that people would know these are our families, and these are very cool. They also worked with other UU congregations in something called Underground Railroad Simulation in Worth Park. And they met talking about issues of poverty. So there was an urban immersion program, and it was a 2-night lock-in, which really appeals to high school, junior high kids. We're going to be alone. And then they served at a soup lunch. So they were doing service. They were providing service. Meanwhile, the senior highs decided, well, let's do our thing. We'll make plans. So they did a lot of planning, and they participated in district-wide something called cons, and they helped plan congregational activities. They had a Valentine's special. They had a special spaghetti dinner inviting the members of the congregation, hosted by the kids. So they were serving, and Mike Pileggi helped with that. And some of the proceeds went directly to a Guatemalan village. We had a Guatemalan worker in the Twin here. I don't know if he was I don't think he was a refugee. He was an immigrant. So we had a connection with his village, and often our funds went partly to there. They had a spring breakfast. Some of the kids, my kids always remember the spring breakfast with the purple and blue pancakes. They also participated in Prairie Star district-wide events, And in 1995, there was something called, in the past, it was something called About Your Sexuality, which is now morphed into OWL. But it offered the youth 2 different age groups, 11 through 13 and 14 through 18. And then they had a lot of volunteers that were doing this. Thanks to Ann Heller, I think she really was instrumental in having increased chances to engage the upstairs folk with the downstairs folk. So she started, as Wendy mentioned earlier in a couple of times ago, she started the Retreat to the Woods program, which is still going on. And Beth, she promoted a mitten tree. There'd be a tree downstairs. Somebody would donate the tree. There'd be names on the tree, some family that they had identified, perhaps from person to person or something. And then we would collect gifts for them during the holiday season. She started a Secret Friends program. And maybe some of you did that, asking members and children to send weekly messages to each other. They had a special Secret Friends bulletin board in the hall. And at the end, the friends would meet and they'd celebrate their friendships. There were some intergenerational services. The information says 5 or 6 times a year, but I'm not quite sure. I don't recall that for sure. But the children did learn what the adults were doing up here. I don't think they were ever in charge of the service at that time. So there were lots and lots of volunteers, and there were over 125 volunteers contributing their time and hours and energy each year. And so the society's members and friends provided funds for the staff. And then parents had to pay a registration fee. And the fees depended, it depends on what year it was, but it was how many kids they had in their family that were enrolled. There was a cap on how many. If you had more than 3, you just paid this amount. And whether the family was pledging or non-pledging. So that idea, again, that Wendy talked about, but they encouraged every family who was an RE family to pledge because that was the way to get your registration fee. Well, at the end of this time, 1995, the families were asked for a survey. What do you think about this program? We've got some really fun things going on. What were some of the issues? Well, of course, it was the 2-hour programming. You take a kid and try and get them out the door and here on time to do this thing. And good luck. Sometimes it happened. Sometimes they'd kind of stroll in, But that was tough because they depended on volunteers. And of course, if you were teaching and volunteering during the block of whenever that was, then you were going to be there too. The other thing was the registration fees. That just doesn't seem to be possible for a lot of people. As Wendy mentioned, our congregation had changed. So we were now more of a middle-class working family type of money. There was a lot of volunteer burnout, and they wanted more guidance with the curriculum. I mean, I remember at one point being given a booklet. I was going to be teaching the 4th graders, and we were learning all about Gaia and the universe. But there wasn't a lot of teacher activities. What am I supposed to do with these 4th graders? We watched a film strip, blah, blah, but I don't know. And there were a lot of issues about space. At that point, we were sharing space with the child garden. And we were in a classroom, and I remember there'd be something behind the cloth on the classroom, which would be all the toys. And our 4th graders couldn't touch those toys because if they did, they'd have to be sterilized before the next day, because of Monday. And so issues of space was really, really an issue. In 1997, there was a new director, Jan Dever, and despite the fact that we didn't have the additional staff person, she was hired. She really, really revamped the program's organization. And the first change was she had a brochure, a quality 1-hour program for 36, 35, 36, 37 Sundays, depending on the year. And change is always very hard, as we have noticed. But there were some families that said, but wait, we want to go to the forum. There's so much interesting stuff going on. If that's 9:30 time, we want somebody to take care of the kids. And we tried doing it with volunteers, but it was very, very hard. And finally, the RE committee, which was organized, said, childcare is not the responsibility of the RE. So you find somebody to take care of these kids. But by and large, the families were pretty happy with the shift just to the one time. The children would attend class from 10:30 to 10:45, and then all of the classes would meet together for community time at 10:45. There'd be some chalice lighting, and the kids were all taught the same thing. And I don't know if Ada knows these things, but Jen and I remembered, we are yous with minds that think, hearts that love, and hands that are willing to serve. And that was repeated every morning, every week. So, and obviously the teachers know that too. So to implement the program, the teachers were then parent volunteers only for 3 curricular sessions, 1 at a time. So you didn't have to go the full year. You could only go 1 hour. And then there would be a holiday term. And the holiday term would be sometimes craft. There'd be somebody coming in to do some singing or art or something that would be special. And Jan really revised the curriculum as a RE teacher. Boy, I really could see that she had been a teacher. She was licensed as something called an LREDA, Licensed Religious Education Doctorate. Thank you. Educating the source. And so we'd have a curriculum and we'd have goals for each class every day. And then there'd be specific activities that she'd talk about. You could do this, you could do that. And then there would always be a social service project that was tied into that particular unit. So it appeared that all was going well, but finances were an ongoing problem. And if you look at the numbers, they start out I found one set of numbers. There was 150, 130, 129, and then there was this gap. And I have a feeling that gap was because we got into an interim issue, perhaps, who knows, or just one school moving out from the other. But all of a sudden, then the attendance drops. And I don't know why. I have thoughts about it, but who knows why. So staffing cuts were made. And the RE program started depending on the board and the congregation to acknowledge the importance of educating our children and youth. Well, of course, if we're going to depend on the board and the congregation, you have to get the kids in front of the congregation more so the congregation knows the kids. There were 2 funds. Wendy talked about Emerson Hopp and Hendrickson, and they were combined at one point, and they were designated as especially RE enhancement. So they could buy the equipment for something like clay, for a claymobile, or things like that. Kendall's installation in 1998 included a kid's charge to the minister. And I think that was probably the first time that had happened. Jan initiated a chalice lighter club, which is why our current chalice was given after Jan left, because it was in memory of what she had done. So the kids from 4th grade and 6th grade would meet 2 times before they were actually lighting the chalice to practice lighting the chalice, which is very interesting because at that point they had these little electric chalice lighters, no candle. That was somebody else had thought about that. And you'd get up and watch these poor kids struggling to light the thing, but that was really cool. I mean, it was something different. They'd learn about the UU principles, and they'd open the service 2 times a month with repeating one of the principles. And then after that, they'd gather at the front of the assembly hall on the steps, as you said, to hear a story or something and then be sung out. So I think we all heard, "Go now in peace," blah, 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 blah. They were sometimes peaceful. Okay. Because it was a destination church and we didn't have a whole lot of activities here for the kids, Jan initiated parent volunteers for an entire year to be what they called community builders. And they would just be with one class and plan community activities for that class, or maybe for two classes that were age appropriate. And then at the same time, winter solstice just blossomed. So at first, there'd been this very thoughtful, quiet winter solstice program, perhaps with a labyrinth or something. And then Audrey came in and the seasonal celebrations committee morphed into more and more celebratory things about that. Youth, the junior high youth included a neighboring faiths course. They would visit different churches around the Twin Cities. They visited local congregations, even of the Unitarians. And there was a revised OWL program that was alternating with an in-house coming-of-age program. And the ninth graders were writing their own credos. And what do they believe? I mean, that was what, you're ninth grade. You're obviously, as you and Sophia talked about, what does God look like? I mean, I believe. And so then those credos were published. And that was very cool too. The senior high youth became more vocal about wanting to implement a program and be more program planning and have volunteers who were not parents. Thank you very much. And so they were trying to integrate those kids. And they worked with people serving people to organize a night on the street. They assisted a neighborhood in North Minneapolis to provide landscaping help. They planned and served another volunteer Valentine's dinner. And they also created an annual youth service. And so there really was much more visibility. And that was incredibly important, I think, to all of our kids, I know. They asked for some kind of a mission trip. Mission trip? Mission. What does that mean? And they also wanted a trip to Boston. And that was great because that's where Jan had her roots. So she led a trip to Boston. In 2003, I think, that was the first Boston trip. And I remember Barb Weather had a little, everybody and the group had little names. So the red birds were over here and the bluebirds were over there. And they went around and looked at all of these famous places. And that was a really good thing. I learned a lot more about our roots. And they also wanted a trip to GA. Luckily, GA was here at one point, which was good because then we didn't have to spend money for transportation and everything. But it got the kids more involved in being a UU. I want to talk 2 minutes about Unity Summer because it was so important in such many ways. We joined with First Universalist. Beth had gotten some kind of a connection going there. And it was a chance for UU youth to meet together with community kids. So there were 5 UU youth, 5 FUS youth, and 10 community kids. And they would really practice learning a lot about social justice concepts. And then they were assigned to work in a local social justice agency. Excuse me. So they could practice hands-on humanism. And FUS volunteered fundraising, and they planned programming with the other volunteers from First Universalist. And for at least one participant, that was my daughter. I told her I'd tell her this. It was a summer that really changed her life because she thought that in order to be a humanist, you had to have hands-on with people. She wanted to do that, but she knew she couldn't do it. She emotionally, she didn't want to do that. So it really changed the trajectory of her career because she learned that she didn't have to be hands-on this person. She could actually work as an administrator, as a social worker, and work with all of the skills that she already had. I can't imagine all of the many, many possibilities with the assistance of truly dedicated RE volunteers. Peter Descoli, oh my goodness, what we owe to him from the dealing with death curriculum to hours and hours. He trained many of the AYS volunteers. Kathleen, thanks. Kathleen Taylor, who is no longer here, she's in North Carolina or South Carolina or something, and Rob Hyde, who is here. They courageously worked with junior high youth. That takes a lot of stamina and courage, let me tell you. Kathleen and Greg Thorpe were the high school non-parent volunteers. Barb Weatherhead, again, as I said. Jean Buckley, who was my counterpart when she was at First Universalist, working with me to help organize the Unity Summer Program. And now she's here, or kind of here, because she goes up north. But in 2001, Jan wrote that the goal of RE programming is to give participants a basis to develop their own religious and ethical beliefs. Children celebrate life, do social service projects, learn about our UU roots, and study various world religions and life issues. We want our young people to feel that they are part of an extended community where they feel welcome, are valued for the gifts they bring, and the people who they are. So we were so lucky to have them as RE volunteers and staff members and everybody. After they left, we had a series of RE directors, many whom lasted a year or so. It was hard to follow. The numbers continued to drop. Then we had COVID, and also an issue. And they have not rebounded. And now we have something called E-Square. So we are working to try and figure out solve the insolvable problem, how to get our kids into UUism. But we'll work on that. Questions? Anybody have any?
Should we can open this up to questions. I think this is pretty interesting. I really feel like why am I here? Because I had a fantastic religious education program growing up here. Do you have questions, thoughts, names to add to the history here? Jenna, yeah.
I forget what you referenced, but towards the end of what you said, something of a date 2003, and that is too late because my oldest daughter was involved in it and she graduated high school in 2001. So it's earlier than that.
Okay. Thanks, Jenna.
George?
Other thoughts?
Just want to say something about the amazing talents that Jan Dever had, and our oldest son Matthew. His social anxiety is very high, and the credo was a real challenge. The last thing he would ever want to do is get up in front of any number of people, not the least being an entire assembly full. And he went in and talked with Jan, and he comes out and says, "Okay, I'll do it." And it was like, okay, how the heck did he do it? Lisa and I were talking to him, trying to, say, it'll be okay. And she just goes, she was able to just do that. The kids trusted her and they loved her. And that's what made all the difference. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
One other thought, when Kendall was here, there was a whole group of us who had Girl Scouts and also some families who had Boy Scouts, and Kendall got really involved with those youth in doing their religion and life badges that they earned for. And I know Kendall also supported Nico Eller, who has a serious reading disability in completing his Eagle Scout thing. So there was a lot of support of youth in those programs.
Wow, good.
One other Bob Kaufman anecdote. I was on the search committee for Kendall. And at that time, Jan had been the RE director, I think, for a year, maybe two. And Bob, soon after he got her and met Jan, convened a secret meeting of the search committee where he chewed us out. And he said, if you let Jan Dever go, you're committing a serious error. So just don't do it. I mean, he was like, you know.
Secret meetings here
He said,
in our open democracy.
This would be a tragedy. So he was an early and very perceptive, director of us and to our benefit.
Can I just for a second see a show of hands? How many of you actually taught or helped somehow with religious education? Wow, look at this. This is great. This is really great. And it taught you something too, right? God. Right.
One other thought about RE and Hinduism. My favorite class was 8th grade church across the street. And Max Green and his wife taught that. And it was wonderful. And throughout my life, I've continued to visit various faith traditions. And that brings me to the Hindu point, and that is I would recommend anyone to visit the Hindu temple in Maple Grove. There are 30,000 Hindus in Minnesota, which made possible they're building a $10 million temple. They brought artisans from India, and it's worth a visit.
Yeah. It is. I have been there, and it is like a short trip to India because the Indians who have come to Minnesota have come from different parts of India, and they couldn't decide on how to shape their temple. So inside the temple, there are miniature models of all the famous temples from around the subcontinent. You're basically getting a tour of India when you go there. Maybe we should do it as a group. Yes.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that they were very encouraging of us coming and wanted to host us at some point. And so we have those connections. And if we want to schedule a time, I'm sure they would love to have us come and give us a tour. We could ask for one.
Well, if they do have a mini meal, it's probably too spicy for most of the people in this audience.
Let me add one bit of history here also. We had decided, I don't know how this started, but we had decided that there was a 100th anniversary of John Dietrich coming up. And we had decided, well, we should go digitize all his sermons so that people would have access to it. Ray and Lee here were absolutely instrumental in that. We also included some Carl Storm things and some Raymond Bragg. Ray and Lee bankrolled a good, huge chunk of this. And Ray also went through a bunch of audio recordings on reel to reel and had found, and that this was for Carl Storm, right? And those are available on there. And it's really interesting to actually hear some of this history come alive when you listen to it. But Ray and I worked very closely together on this, and it was a total privilege to work with him. And so the FUS archive site came out of that. And if you have not been there, it's kind of an interesting thing. In fact, we should name it after Ray and Lee. But it's very interesting to go see. Because it's got a ton of things in there. You want a quick read, you can read one of these addresses in 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Yes, you can go in the FUS website. I'm trying to think of which menu it's in. I think it's in the About Us menu, and you can go in there. You'd think I'd remember the URL right now, but I don't. But it's still up there, and we're adding to it all the history smashes and other things that we've been doing regarding history have gone up there. Yeah. FirstUnitarian.org/FUS/FUS archives. No. Oh, okay. .org/FUS archives. Oh,
firstunitarian.org/FUS/archives.
All right.
Anyone else?
I think this has gone long, and I'm sorry. I want to just leave you with a sort of a thought, and you have to supply the vocabulary for this. But there used to be congregations would rate themselves on how big they were. And actually, when I was in seminary, the male students developed. They were talking about how big a church they'd get after they graduated, and the female students just referred to that as steeple envy. But there was a period when we were 800, and there's numerical growth, and these large congregations get a lot of praise. But there's other kinds of growth, and sometimes Protestant churches will call that spiritual growth among the congregation. I don't know if we'd use those words, but maybe you can think of some other words for the kind of things that we've been talking about today: the incredible volunteerism, the generosity, the willingness to learn about youth and to work with youth and to teach youth how to enjoy the world. You can find words, and if you come up with some good words, share them with me, please. Kim. Oh, there we go.
And it's not directly related to this, but something that I found recently very interesting. If you go and look at the information on the Anoka tornado of 1939, you will see that the Universalist Church of Anoka was destroyed. And I didn't even know there was a Universalist church in Anoka, and I live very close to there. And also, Hutchinson, the town west of here, in their city charter, they had the establishment of a humanities church.
Really?
A humanities church. Also in the archives, or rather the charter, abolition of slavery and equal rights for women.
Wow. All right. Hutchinson, probably named after George and Jenna here. Thank you all for coming here, and let's continue the conversation. If you have ideas, names, things to share with us, please do, with George, Cindy, Adele, and myself, and Rev Yulin. Oh, yep, quick.
So I think you all know this, but we'll just get it on the recording that this has been a project of the transition team, who are guiding the congregation through the interim process and doing the work that the congregation needs to do to kind of know itself in that spiraling way, to know itself and gather information about who it is and what you're looking for and what would be the appropriate thing in a new minister. So thanks to the transition team, this whole history project was done, and it took a lot of work on their part, and they've dug deep and done a lot of work to make that happen, to provide that to you. And as I mentioned in assembly this morning, there's work on some banners that will soon be hung, I think, downstairs, that cover each of the History Smash days with some photos and history. And so we're looking forward to getting those up. And thank you very much for participating and sharing.